Mill called me a freeloader for being a som and convinced my husband to make me contribute financially. But when she demanded he control my spending, he finally told her the house she's been living in rent-free actually belongs to me. Being a stay-at-home mom was never something I, 34F, had to justify to my husband, 38M. From the moment we decided to have kids, we both agreed that I would stay home to raise them while he worked. It wasn't some impulsive choice. I had a stable job before, but we ran the numbers, and with daycare costs and our priorities, it made more sense for me to be home with the kids. My husband never had an issue with it. If anything, he was incredibly grateful, always telling me how much he appreciated everything I did to keep our home and family running smoothly. Unfortunately, his mother didn't share the same sentiment. Mill had always been the type of woman who prided herself on independence and hard work, which, in her mind, translated to looking down on women who didn't work outside the home. From the very beginning, she made snide remarks about me living off her son, treating me like some gold digger despite the fact that we had been together long before my husband even established his career. At first, I ignored it. But over time, her comments became harder to brush off. Anytime we visited her, she found a way to bring up my supposed lack of contribution. She'd casually mention women she knew who managed to balance motherhood and work. She'd sigh dramatically when talking about how much my husband sacrificed for our family while I got to stay home all day. If I so much as bought myself something new, she'd comment about how nice it must be to spend her son's hard-earned money. It didn't matter that our finances were joint, or that my husband had zero complaints. Mill had already decided that I was a burden. Then, she took it a step further. One evening, my husband came home looking tired, and I could tell something was on his mind. When I asked, he hesitated, but eventually admitted that his mother had called him earlier with some concerns. Apparently, she had spent a good portion of the conversation convincing him that I was taking advantage of his generosity. She told him that it wasn't fair that I got to stay home while he worked and that I should be contributing financially. But she didn't stop there. She actually suggested that he start limiting my spending to encourage me to be more responsible. I stared at my husband, waiting to hear how he responded, but to my surprise, he hadn't shut her down right away. He told me that he mostly listened without agreeing or disagreeing, which, to me, meant that a small part of him was actually considering what she had said. That stung. I wasn't mad at him, but I was definitely hurt. After everything I did raising our kids, running our household, taking care of all the little things he never even had to think about, he was letting his mother's words get to him. I could have fought back right then. I could have defended myself, pointed out how ridiculous it was for her to interfere in our marriage. But instead, I did something else. I let it go. Not because I was okay with it, but because I knew that the best way to handle Mill was to let her dig her own grave. So I just smiled at my husband and told him I understood. I told him that if he thought we needed to have a discussion about finances, we could do that. He seemed relieved, thinking that I was being reasonable, but in reality, I was simply waiting. Because I knew something Mill didn't, something that would completely change the game when the time was right. And I couldn't wait to watch it unfold. Update 1. After my husband told me about his mother's little concerned talk, I could tell he was still mulling over her words. He was quieter than usual, thoughtful in a way that told me something was weighing on him. I didn't press him on it, and I certainly didn't argue. I wanted to see just how far Mill would take this. If she wanted to paint me as a freeloader, I'd let her believe it, just to see how deep she'd dig her own hole. A few days later, my husband hesitantly suggested that we should revisit our finances. His tone was careful, like he was stepping onto unstable ground. He mentioned that maybe we should talk about what I could contribute now that the kids were getting older. I had to hold back a laugh. Our kids were still very young, nowhere near the age where they could be left alone. And yet, somehow, Mill had convinced my husband that I was just sitting around all day doing nothing while he worked. Instead of getting defensive, I played into it. I told him that if he thought it was necessary, I'd absolutely consider picking up some extra financial responsibilities. I even offered to take on a few bills if it would make him feel better. He seemed surprised at how easily I agreed, but instead of being happy, he looked guilty. Probably because deep down, he knew this wasn't his idea, it was his mother's manipulation. Still, he went along with it. He assured me that this wasn't about punishing me or doubting my efforts, but about being fair. I just smiled and agreed. And then I waited. Update 2. Mill must have been absolutely giddy, thinking she had won. She suddenly became bolder, making offhanded comments about how she was glad I was finally realizing that I needed to pull my weight. She even started suggesting little side hustles I could do from home. She had all sorts of ideas: online tutoring, freelance writing, baking cakes for extra cash, even babysitting other kids since I was already home. She made sure to phrase it in the most patronizing way possible, like she was doing me a favor by offering helpful suggestions for how I could be more useful. I nodded and humored her every time. I told her I'd look into some remote work. I agreed that budgeting more carefully was a great idea. I completely understood how difficult it must be for my husband to be the sole breadwinner. She ate it all up, thinking she had finally put me in my place. But she had no idea what was coming. Update 3. A few weeks later, my husband and I were visiting Mill at her house. As always, she found a way to bring up finances. But this time, She got even bolder. She outright suggested that my husband start handling our household budget himself, just to ensure that I wasn't overspending. I could feel my husband stiffen beside me. That was the first sign that Mil had gone too far. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple like he was exhausted. And then, before I could even respond, he said something that made Mil's smug expression disappear in an instant. He told her that if she was so concerned about fairness, then maybe it was time they had an honest conversation about finances, starting with her own living situation. Mil blinked, confused. She laughed nervously, asking what he meant. He didn't sugarcoat it. He reminded her that she had been living comfortably in her house for years, never once paying a dime in rent. She was always quick to judge other people's financial situations, yet she had never once questioned why she wasn't expected to contribute to her own housing costs. She still didn't get it. She waved him off, saying that it was different because she was living in her son's home. That's when my husband gave her the final blow. He told her that it wasn't his house. Mil's entire body went still. She stared at him, eyes narrowing in disbelief. She let out a forced chuckle, shaking her head, telling him to stop joking. He didn't laugh. He just repeated himself, this time more firmly. It wasn't his house. It had never been his house. Mil looked at me then, her expression darkening as if she was finally starting to understand. Her voice was higher pitched now, a little desperate, as she asked who the house belonged to. My husband didn't hesitate. He told her the truth, that the house was mine. For a moment, there was complete silence. Mil opened her mouth and then closed it again like she couldn't quite form words. She turned back to my husband as if hoping he would take it back, but he just looked at her with a tired expression. Mil's face drained of all color. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time in a long time, she was speechless. She had spent weeks calling me a leech, as someone mooching off her son's hard work. But the entire time, she had been living under my roof, completely unaware of it. I sat back and watched, letting the reality sink in for her. She wanted fairness? Well, now she was going to get it. And it was going to be on my terms. For a few moments, Mil just sat there, blinking in stunned silence, like her brain was struggling to process the information. She kept looking between me and my husband, waiting for one of us to say that it was all some kind of joke. But neither of us did. She let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head as if trying to dismiss the entire thing. She told my husband that it wasn't possible this was his house. She tried to recover, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said that, of course, this was just a misunderstanding. We were married. Naturally, it should belong to him. My husband cut in before I could respond. His tone was neutral, but there was a sharpness to it that Mil couldn't miss. He told her that it didn't really matter what she assumed, the fact remained that the house belonged to me. Mil's fingers clenched against the armrest of the couch. She forced out a chuckle, waving her hand dismissively. She said that was fine, it didn't really change anything. It wasn't like I was going to suddenly kick her out. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, and told her that, actually, I had been thinking about fairness a lot lately. Since she had been so concerned about everyone pulling their weight financially, I figured it was only right that she started contributing as well. Her smile faltered. She let out another forced laugh, telling me to stop joking. I didn't laugh. I told her that I wasn't joking. Since she was living in my house, it was only fair that she started paying rent. Mil's entire face went pale. Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to argue, but no words came out. She turned to my husband, expecting him to step in, but he just sighed and shook his head, telling her that it was the least she could do. She sputtered, trying to grasp at anything that would make this conversation go away. She told us that she was family. Surely we weren't expecting her to actually pay rent to live in her own home. I raised an eyebrow and reminded her that, legally, it wasn't her home. It was mine. Her breathing grew uneven as she stammered out that this was different. She said she wasn't some tenant, she was his mother. I nodded, pretending to be understanding. I told her that I completely got it. It was an emotional situation. That's why I was willing to be flexible. Instead of treating her like a regular tenant, I was offering her a discounted rent far less than she would be paying if she tried to find another place in this economy. Her expression twisted, her nostrils flaring as she muttered that she couldn't believe this was happening. I shrugged and told her that I was only following her advice. She had been very vocal about how everyone needed to contribute more, so this was me taking her words seriously. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how I had flipped the entire situation onto her. She shook her head furiously. She said that maybe she had been a little harsh before, but she hadn't meant any harm. She was just looking out for her son. She admitted that maybe she had misunderstood things, and she could see now that I wasn't really freeloading. I smiled, thanking her for finally realizing that. Then I asked if she would be paying rent monthly or if she preferred to set up automatic payments. Her face twisted, and she stammered out that she didn't think rent was necessary now that we had cleared things up. I tilted my head and reminded her that she had been very passionate about fairness. Surely, she wouldn't want to live somewhere without contributing, not when she had been so worried about my financial input. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She was trapped, and she knew it. She looked to my husband, pleading silently, but he didn't move a muscle. His voice was firm as he told her that I was right if she wanted to talk about fairness, then she needed to be fair too. Her body slumped slightly like all the fight had been drained out of her. She mumbled something about needing time to think, then quickly excused herself from the room. I could hear her pacing in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out a way to undo the damage. My husband told me that he had never seen his mother look so lost before. I told him it was only fair and smiled. Then he asked what I would do if she actually agreed to pay rent. I told him she had too. And that it was a good thing that he brought this up because we needed to revisit our little finance talk. He looked a little uncomfortable when I mentioned it. He didn't really think I was going to let it go, did he? Update 4. I didn't expect her to apologize. I knew her pride wouldn't let her, at least not immediately. But I did expect some sort of backlash, and I was right. That very evening after we told her we were leaving, I suspected she was trying to call some family members to vent. I wasn't worried. I knew the truth was on my side. The next morning, I received a text from my sister-in-law. She asked what had happened because their mother had called her in a fit, saying that I had tricked her and humiliated her in front of my husband. I almost laughed at how twisted she had made the story sound. I simply texted back that my husband had told her the truth, nothing more, nothing less. By the afternoon, the guilt tripping had begun. My mother-in-law started sending passive-aggressive messages, acting as if she was the real victim in all this. She said she couldn't believe I had let her live under the illusion that this was her home, that I had made her feel secure and then pulled the rug out from under her. She asked how I could be so cruel. I stared at the message for a long time before finally responding. I told her that she was welcome to stay in the house after all. I had never once threatened to kick her out, but if she truly wanted to see my contributions increase, she could start paying rent. She didn't respond for hours, and when she finally did, it wasn't through text. A letter arrived in the mail 2 days later, addressed to me in her shaky handwriting. It was the most half-hearted apology I had ever read. She said she was sorry if she had upset me, but she had only wanted what was best for her son. She said she never meant to make me feel unappreciated, but that she just had old-fashioned views on how marriage should work. She ended the letter with a plea, asking me to reconsider the rent situation, claiming that she was a widow and that her late husband had never wanted her to struggle financially. I folded the letter and set it aside, my decision already made. She wanted me to increase my contribution? Fine. I was giving her the opportunity to contribute as well. If she had truly seen herself as the lady of the house, then she could start acting like one. Update 5. After sending my mother-in-law's letter straight into a drawer where forgotten things went to die, I decided it was time to have a real conversation with my husband. He had defended me, sure, but I wasn't going to just let the way he initially entertained his mother's complaints slide. He had let her get too comfortable in our marriage, and that wasn't something I could ignore. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat him down at the kitchen table, my fingers tapping lightly on the surface as I let out a sigh. I told him I'd given our finances some thought, and I had decided it was time for me to go back to work. The way his head snapped up made it almost comical. His eyes widened in pure shock, and for a second, he just stared at me like I had lost my mind. He asked me what I meant by that, why I would need to do something so drastic. I shrugged, keeping my tone even. I said that since his mother was so concerned about my contributions, I figured it was only fair that I get a real job, one that paid, one that made it clear I wasn't just mooching off him. His jaw tightened, and I saw his hands clench into small fists. He said I didn't need to do that I knew we had already agreed this arrangement worked for both of us, that our family was in a good place because I was able to be home with the kids. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. I asked him if that was true, then why did he let his mother talk about me like I was some freeloader? Why did he sit there, humoring her complaints, acting like I needed to justify my worth in our marriage? His face paled slightly, and I could see him struggling to find an answer. He rubbed the back of his neck, then let out a sigh. He admitted that he had stepped out of line. He said he was sorry, that he should have shut his mother down the first time she brought it up instead of letting it drag out as long as it did. I didn't let him off that easily. I pointed out that he had let someone else meddle in our marriage once. That meant he could do it again. I told him that trust wasn't just about being faithful, it was about knowing that your partner wouldn't allow outside influences to dictate your relationship. His mother had no business being in our finances, and yet, he had let her have an opinion. His lips pressed together in a tight line, and he looked guilty. He said he hadn't realized how much he had let her words get to him. He admitted that at first, he thought she was just expressing concern, but now he could see how much she had been manipulating the situation. He said he hated that he had made me feel like I needed to prove myself. I nodded, satisfied that he was starting to understand, but I wasn't done. I brought up the fact that I had been looking through our finances recently and noticed just how much money he had been sending his mother every month. That part caught him completely off guard. He hesitated before asking what I meant. I pulled up the numbers on my phone and slid it across the table toward him. I told him I had seen the transactions, the regular payments, the amount that was going directly to his mother for no real reason. I asked him how long he planned to keep that up. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. He said that she was his mother, that she was a widow, and he had just wanted to make sure she was comfortable. I let out a slow breath and then told him that things were going to change. Since I was apparently expected to contribute more, I had already made the decision his mother was going to have to start contributing too. And that meant that money he had been sending to her? It was going to go to a caretaker instead. Because if I was going to work, we were going to need someone to help with the kids and the house. He looked completely torn, like he didn't know whether to be upset or ashamed. He said he had never really thought about it that way, that he had just been so used to taking care of his mother that he hadn't considered how unfair it was to keep prioritizing her over our own household. I told him that I understood wanting to take care of family. But his mother was not his responsibility the way our children were. She had lived in that house for years, rent-free, without lifting a finger, all while criticizing me for supposedly taking advantage of him. I wasn't going to let that continue. He ran a hand through his hair, still looking frustrated with himself, but I could tell he was coming to terms with it. He let out a sigh and said I was right. That he had been enabling her, and that it needed to stop. I felt like we were finally on the same page, but you never know with men. I'll keep an eye on him. Update 6. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop dragging things out. I had let my mother-in-law's arrogance slide for years, but after everything she had done, I wasn't going to keep enabling her. If she wanted to act like she was above everyone else, then she could figure out how to survive on her own. I called her and got straight to the point. I told her she needed to start paying rent, and I wasn't talking about some discounted family rate either. If she didn't have this month's payment ready, then she could start looking for another place to live because I was going to list the house for rent. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then she let out an indignant laugh, like she thought I was joking. She asked me what kind of daughter-in-law did something like this to her husband's mother, saying that I had no right to kick her out of her own home. I reminded her that the house was mine, bought long before I had even met her son. I told her she wasn't entitled to a free ride just because she had decided to rewrite history and act like this was some family estate. She had lived here rent-free for years while having the audacity to accuse me of taking advantage of her son. If she couldn't come up with the money, then she needed to find another arrangement. She started sputtering, saying that it wasn't fair, that I was being cruel and unreasonable. She said that she didn't have that kind of money just lying around. That was when my husband, who had been sitting nearby listening to everything, took the phone from my hand. He told his mother that he was also cutting off the monthly payments he had been sending her. Since I was going back to work, we needed to hire a caretaker, and that money was going to go toward taking care of our own family. The way she screeched was so loud that I could hear it even without the phone on speaker. She yelled that I couldn't do this, that I didn't have the right to just throw her out like some stranger. She accused me of turning her son against her, of ruining her life. I stayed completely calm and told her that if she had been a little less arrogant while living off someone else, maybe she wouldn't be in this situation. She had spent so much time looking down on me, acting like I was some burden on her son, when in reality, she had been the one bleeding him dry. She tried to argue, tried to pull out every manipulative tactic she had, but I wasn't budging. I reminded her that she wasn't some helpless woman with no options. Her late husband had left her money, and she had savings she could dip into. And if that wasn't enough, then she could do what everyone else in the world did when they needed money: get a job. At that, she completely lost it. She screamed that she was too old to work, that I was being vindictive, that I was trying to ruin her life just because of one misunderstanding. She kept saying that I needed to be reasonable, that family didn't do this to each other. I cut her off and told her that family didn't undermine each other's marriages. Family didn't try to paint someone as a gold digger while living off them for free. Family didn't expect endless handouts while treating people like dirt. If she wanted to stay in that house, she had to pay up. That was the end of the discussion. I hung up before she could say anything else. I knew she'd call back, probably a dozen times, but I wasn't going to waste my energy listening to her tantrums. I had said my piece. Now it was up to her to figure out what she was going to do. My husband let out a long sigh and ran a hand down his face. He looked drained, but I could tell he also felt relieved, like he had finally broken free from whatever hold his mother had on him. He said he should have done this a long time ago. That she had always acted like she was helpless, but deep down, she was just someone who expected to be taken care of without ever giving anything in return. I told him that as long as she was in that house, we needed to hold firm. No more giving in, no more bending to her will. If she wanted to live there, she needed to pay for it. And if she didn't, then she could pack her bags and find somewhere else to go. The next few days were tense. My mother-in-law tried every trick in the book, calling other family members to guilt us, acting like she was on the verge of homelessness, even pretending to have sudden health issues. But no one was buying it. Everyone knew she had money, and everyone knew she had done this to herself. A week later, she finally sent over the rent payment. It wasn't a pleasant victory, but it was still a victory. She had spent years looking down on me, calling me a freeloader, but in the end, she was the one who had to pay up. And honestly, it felt pretty damn good. She should be happy I didn't ask for a deposit. Update 7. A few months later, I finally had some good news to share. I got a job. It wasn't anything flashy, but it paid well, had decent hours, and most importantly, gave me the independence I had wanted back. It felt good to know that I wasn't just staying home, constantly being scrutinized for every dollar I spent, like I had to prove my worth in my own marriage. Some people had suggested that maybe we should just pay my mother-in-law to watch the kids instead of hiring a caretaker. That way, she could contribute something, and we could keep the money in the family. I had one answer for that: absolutely not. There was no way I was going to let that woman be anywhere near my kids for extended periods, much less let her have any influence over them. I knew exactly how she talked about me when she thought I wasn't listening, and I wasn't about to let my children grow up hearing her garbage. I refused to let her plant the idea in their heads that their own mother was some lazy gold digger, or that they owed her something just because she was their grandmother. Besides, I didn't want her in my house more than necessary. If she was already this unbearable while living separately, I wasn't going to invite more chaos into my life. So no, I wasn't going to let my mother-in-law watch my kids. That woman had spent years looking down on me, and now she had to sit with the reality that I made for her. She had wanted me to contribute more? Well, I was working now. But instead of funding her entitled lifestyle, my money would be going toward giving my children a safe, happy home, one that she had no part in. And honestly, that was the best decision I could have made.